Hey guys, tonight we drift the morning mist curling over the quiet, shallow waters of an ancient lake. Texcoco, to be exact, where strange little islands float like oversized lily pads. But they're not lily pads. They're gardens, floating ones, built by hand, by sunburned farmers in tunics, layering mud and reeds and whatever else they could drag up from the depths. You can almost smell the wet soil and old water. A fish flicks its tail somewhere nearby. A frog plunks lazily into the canal. And you're about to spend the next few hours building and tending to these swamp gardens. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are kneeling in a canoe, the wooden hull creaking softly under your weight. The water is dark but calm, lapping gently against the sides. In front of you is a tangle of reeds, half-submerged logs, and something that, maybe, if you squint, might be a farm. If a farm were made by a beaver with a passion for square geometry. This, your guide explains with a proud sweep of the arm, is a chinampa. It doesn't look like much yet, just a soggy mess of woven reed mats, a few wooden stakes sticking out like crooked teeth, and piles of mud in the least convenient places. But that's the secret. The beauty is in the mess. You are about to help build one. No gloves, no brakes. And yes, your sandals will get lost in the muck at least once. Chinampas, despite sounding like a cheerful carnival snack, were the lifeblood of the Aztec world. They weren't technically floating, but they sure looked like it, anchored to the lake bed with willow poles, bordered by channels for water access and boat travel, and somehow sturdy enough to grow maize, squash, amaranth, and chilies. You grab a long pole and jab it into the lake bed, just like the others. Thud. It sinks with a resistance that feels weirdly satisfying, like poking a thick pudding. This pole is one of many, part of a rectangular frame that will support your new mud island. And yes, it smells exactly how you'd imagine, like compost having an identity crisis. Historians still argue whether chinampas were a purely post-Teotihuacan invention, or if earlier Mesoamerican cultures developed versions long before the Aztecs arrived on the scene. Either way, the Aztecs certainly perfected the form. By the height of their empire, these garden islands covered miles of lake surface, forming a lush, patchwork grid that fed tens of thousands. You're handed a bundle of tule reeds, long, tough, a little pokey. You lay them across the framework, weaving them in tight like you're making a giant basket. Then comes the mud. Buckets of it. Sloshing, slapping, squelching mud. You dump it over the reeds, layer by layer, like you're frosting a very earthy cake. There's a rhythm to it. Somehow, build, scoop, dump, pat. Build, scoop, dump, pat. Your arms ache, your back protests, and yet it's strangely satisfying. You can't stop wondering how they figured this out. Like, who looked at a swamp and said, "You know what would be great here? Zucchini." It wasn't just desperation. It was brilliance. Floating gardens solved multiple problems at once. The Valley of Mexico had a high population, limited arable land, and a central city, Tenochtitlan, plopped right in the middle of a lake. Not ideal for farming, unless you could bring the farm to the lake. Chinampas created more land without cutting down forests or draining fields. Genius. Eco-conscious before it was cool. Mainstream archaeological surveys confirm that the average chinampa was about 30 meters long and 2 to 4 meters wide. Basically the size of a generous backyard garden. And you're building one with nothing more than sticks and mud. Again, you will not survive this. Your guide, whose calves are covered in drying lake silt, gestures to a small altar perched on a corner of the chinampa. It's barely more than a stone with some flowers, but it tells you something else about these floating farms. They weren't just practical, they were spiritual. Some say the gardens were blessed before planting, dedicated to Tlaloc, god of rain, or Chicumcotl, goddess of maize. There might be offerings buried in the mud. Seeds, feathers, the occasional drop of pulque. Yes, fermented sap. And yes, someone probably drank the rest and then fell in the lake. That's tradition. As you sit back in your canoe, wiped out from the morning's labor, the garden begins to take shape. A real one, with little rows, drainage ditches, maybe a pile of compost in the corner that smells suspiciously like duck. Oh, the ducks will come, and the frogs, and the dragonflies the size of snack bars. It'll be a whole ecosystem before you know it, each creature doing its part, uninvited but not unwelcome. Even the mud seems more friendly now, less like a punishment and more like a promise. As the sun dips lower and the water turns gold and glassy, you paddle gently back toward the edge of the Chinampa fields. There are hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching off into the mist. You realize you're part of something astonishing. A city on water, a garden on a lake, an empire rooted in mud and held together with nothing more than patience, willow sticks, and sheer willpower. And just like that, you're hooked. You kind of want to build another one, maybe after a nap. You wake with sore arms and the faint smell of lake water still clinging to your clothes. The early sun creeps through low-hanging clouds, catching on the mist that hovers above the canals like a blanket the earth forgot to fold. Birds wheel overhead, caught with a sort of smug self-importance reserved for creatures that don't have to shovel mud for a living. But the Chinampa waits, and it's growing. The structure you helped build yesterday looks alive now. Overnight, tiny green shoots have broken the surface, curling up like sleepy fingers greeting the dawn. Maize, if you're lucky. Or maybe amaranth, nutty, nutritious, and a favorite among Aztec warriors. You can't tell yet. You're still learning to read the soggy alphabet of stems and sprigs. Your mentor, a wiry old man with a voice like gravel and too few teeth for someone who eats corn every day, nods at your progress. Then he hands you a net. It's time to feed the garden. Not with fertilizer, in a sack. No. This is the part where you learn that floating farms didn't float alone. They were part of a full cycle system, one that involved more than just soil and seeds. You lean out from your canoe and drag the net to the canal, scooping up globs of algae, decaying plant matter, and the occasional startled fish who probably thought retirement in Lake Texcoco would be more peaceful than this. You dump the mess into a hollowed-out trough at the edge of the Chinampa. It steams faintly in the morning sun. Smells like bad decisions and progress. This will be composted down with old reeds, ash, and manure collected, incidentally, from the night soil jars of Tenochtitlan itself. Yes, human fertilizer. Try not to think about it while you're planting the cucumbers. Historians still argue whether the use of human waste in Chinampa agriculture was widespread or reserved for elite garden plots closer to the city. The archaeological evidence is murky, like the water you're standing in. But what's not debated is the Aztecs' impressive commitment to recycling. Nearly everything was repurposed. Bones into tools, obsidian chips into knives, old clothes into paper, even gods. Yes, some deities were hybridized as older beliefs were woven into new ones, like divine compost. The neat rows of crops are surprisingly orderly. You use a sharpened stick to press tiny seeds into the soil one by one. Not too deep, not too shallow. Just right, like a bedtime story Goldilocks never read because she was too busy getting sunburned in a canoe. Amaranth, beans, tomatoes, chilies, each with its own plot, each with its own ritual. Some farmers whispered prayers as they planted. Others left tiny offerings, a shard of jade, a feather, a pinch of cow, so the gods might take pity and bless the harvest. One particularly odd tradition included planting maize in rows of 9 to mimic the 9 levels of the Aztec underworld. Fringe? Yes. Effective? Who's to say? But 9's a lucky number now. As you work, a breeze rustles through the awi-wady trees at the edge of the water. These ancient swamp cypresses anchor the Chinampa's perimeter and give the whole field a windswept, enchanted look, like someone spilled a Monet painting and then farmed on it. Their roots help stabilize the soil, and their shade cools the crops. They're your leafy co-workers now. Then a barge glides by, flat, wide, and piloted by a boy who's maybe 12 and already better at steering than you'll ever be. The barge is piled high with chayote squash and purple-hued beans, bound for Tenochtitlan's main market. It's a floating conveyor belt to produce, and you're kind of jealous. You wave. He doesn't wave back. It's fine. He's probably got a delivery quota. Or a crush on someone from the maize aisle. You paddle back to shore for a lunch at Tlacoyo's. Thick corn cake stuffed with beans and topped with crumbly cheese. Hot, salty, perfect. You eat in the shade, feet dangling in the water, watching dragonflies zip like tiny neon drones between crops. It's peaceful, almost suspiciously so. Then your mentor points to the sky. Clouds, thick, dark, and brooding like an unpaid storm god. Rain. You scramble to secure the chinampa. Not because it'll wash away, it won't. These gardens are built to handle flood and drought alike. But too much water too fast can rot the young crops. You dig shallow trenches to divert the overflow and pack the edges with more reeds. You look ridiculous, like someone making mud pies for an audience of ducks. But it works. The rain comes, warm and relentless, pattering on the leaves and soaking your hair flat. And through it all, the chinampa holds. Your crops bow slightly, drink deeply, and carry on. Mainstream history tells us the Aztec Empire was defined by its pyramids, its warriors, its rituals. But here, knee-deep in lake mud, you realize that none of that would have existed without chinampas. These little floating rectangles were the quiet heartbeat of a civilization. One scholar even called them engineered Eden. Another said they were swampy miracles. That scholar might have been drunk. Still, it fits. You slosh back to shore as the rain lightens. The garden glistens. The air smells of wet soil and future feasts. And somehow, despite your soaked tunic, you're smiling. You didn't just survive the day. You grew it. You stretch your arms, stiff from yesterday's paddle work, and squint at the soft, amber light filtering to the thatched roof shelter. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play. Airy, reedy notes riding on the wind like a musical dragonfly. It's market day, and Tenochtitlan is calling. Today, you're not farming. Today, you're loading up the produce your little chinampa has yielded, modest but vibrant. A basket of chilies that could scare a ghost. A mound of amaranth seeds that crunch like tiny promises. And a curious little pile of zokanasal, the tart cactus fruit that makes your lips pucker and your stomach oddly thankful. You got a boat to fill and a city to reach. You shove off from the bank, your canoe wobbling slightly like it's reconsidering this whole buoyancy thing. The canals are already bustling. Other farmers, fishermen, flower sellers, and one man who's either transporting geese or being haunted by them. You float along the water's surface like a misplaced shopping cart in a very organized floodplain. Tenochtitlan rises slowly on the horizon. Yes, the island city of the Aztecs, shimmering like a mirage stitched together with white stone and obsidian shadows. Built on Lake Texcoco, with causeways linking it to the mainland, the city is crisscrossed with canals, wide enough for two-way traffic. You don't even need roads when your whole metropolis is a Venice with spice. Historians agree that Tenochtitlan was among the most advanced cities of its time. In the early 1500s, it may have held up to 200,000 people, more than Paris or London. The Spaniards, when they arrived, expected backward huts and got a floating megacity with public sanitation, market zoning, and a very opinionated priesthood. One conquistador allegedly fainted. It might have been the altitude, or the chilies. You dock near the marketplace, Tlatelolco. Here, commerce hums like a beehive on caffeine. You're immediately overwhelmed by the colors, the smells, and the low-grade yelling. Thousands of people bartering for everything from gold earrings to roasted frogs. Don't knock it till you've tried it. With lime? Not bad. You weave your way past a seller hawking blue corn tortillas, and another displaying feathers so vivid they look photoshopped. You lay out your own modest harvest. An old woman eyes your tomatoes skeptically, pokes one like it owes her money, then nods and buys 3. Progress. Beside you, a vendor in a tall feather hat sells chocolate paste. Thick, dark, bitter. Not your modern candy bar chocolate. No sugar, no milk. Just roasted cacao beans ground with chili and vanilla into a thick paste, then mixed with water and frothed into a drink worthy of royalty, or at least Instagram. Chocolate was so prized in Aztec society that cacao beans were used as currency. 1 bean might buy you a tamale. 100? A rabbit. 1,000? Well, now you're bragging. You trade a pouch of amaranth for a clay whistle shaped like a jaguar. Press it to your lips and the thing roars. Actually roars. You jump. The vendor cackles. Joke's on him, you love it. The air smells like roasted maize and sweat. You pass an herb seller with bundles of epazote and wormseed, both useful and vaguely sinister sounding. You spot a butcher offering iguana steaks. He sees your hesitation and shrugs like, "Don't knock it. You probably won't survive this marketplace without trying something questionable." Still, the best part today is watching how the fruits of the Chinampas fuel this whole ecosystem. You start seeing your vegetables everywhere. Those squash blossoms in the stew pot could be yours. That garland of marigolds on the priest's altar? Definitely Chinampa grown. That suspiciously heavy tamale? Hopefully not a rock. Historians still argue whether the marketplace had formal oversight, or if it was run by communal standards and eagle-eyed gossip. Some say a hierarchy of judges kept peace, settling disputes with fines, feathers, or time spent cleaning the public latrines. Others insist the merchants themselves maintained order, bound by tradition, reputation, and mutual fear of being reincarnated as spoiled maize. You sit by your canoe as the sun begins to drop behind the lake's shimmering rim. The city glows in gold and amber, rooftops shining like polished obsidian. Boats crisscross the canals, their silhouettes like stitched threads pulling the city together. You snack on a tlaxcali, like a tortilla but fancier, and sip some spicy chocolate. It hits your tongue like a thunderclap, wrapped in velvet. Nearby, a pair of dancers rehearse steps for a ceremony tomorrow. Their feathered headdresses ripple in the wind, and one trips over his own sandal. You pretend not to notice. And you think, this place works. From muddy Chinampa to bustling metropolis, there's a system here. One that recycles, reinvents, and relentlessly thrives. You paddle home in the blue-gray dusk, belly full, arms tired, heart oddly light. A dragonfly perches on your bow like it's catching a free ride. You let it. Why not? You're practically family now. The stars begin to blink on overhead, as if even the gods want to get a look at this floating city. You lie back in your canoe, chin tilted toward the sky, wondering how many generations have planted, traded, danced, and drifted down this same path, and how many more will follow. You wake early the next morning, the Chinampa mist curling around your ankles like lazy smoke. The air is thick with dew, and somewhere a frog belts out its morning aria like it's auditioning for the lake's most dramatic soap opera. You stretch, blink the crust from your eyes, and reach instinctively for your digging stick. Today, you're expanding. Your patch of floating farmland has been generous, but there's always a whisper of more. More squash, more maize, maybe even room for a chili pepper experiment that won't end with smoke pouring out of your nose. So, you're headed to the edge of your family's plot, where the water still laps gently at the mud like a cat licking cream from a bowl. Chinampas, in case you're still fuzzy from sleep, are basically floating rectangles of agricultural magic. But they're not actually floating like lily pads or tourist misconceptions. These are carefully engineered plots, made by piling mud and decaying vegetation between stakes, weaving it all together with reeds and roots until you've got a kind of living raft that stays anchored in place. Think of it as swampy Legos, but with a PhD in environmental science. You gather water plants like tulle and sedge, layering them in like lasagna. Then comes lakebed muck, thick, nutrient-rich sludge, ideal for coaxing crops into overachieving. The smell is memorable, a sort of ancient soup. You tell yourself it's the scent of prosperity. Or, at the very least, it'll keep the neighbors from borrowing your tools. Next, you plant aijo trees, willowy little wonders that stabilize the whole structure with their roots and offer a bit of shade for the shire crops. These trees are like the stagehands of the Chinampa world. Quiet, essential, and probably overworked. Historians agree this whole process created some of the most efficient agriculture in human history. Chinampas could produce multiple harvests per year, yielding up to 7 times more food than dryland fields. The soil was self-renewing, the water provided natural irrigation, and your commute to work was basically kayaking through Eden. But scholars still argue whether Chinampas were invented out of pure necessity, population pressure, limited land, or whether they were a deliberate innovation born from ecological genius. Either way, your ancestors didn't wait around for a zoning board. They saw water, saw mud, and went full Bob the Builder on it. You pressed the newly made earth down with your feet. It's squishy, sure, but solid enough. Tomorrow you'll plant amaranth, that protein-packed pseudo-cereal that never quite got the cereal box treatment it deserved. You run your fingers through a pouch of seeds, marveling at how something so tiny can make a body feel so full. Nearby, your cousin is using Chinampa debris to build a duck enclosure. She claims ducks make excellent pest control. You believe her, but mostly because she wields a hoe like it's a sacred relic. The ducks look unimpressed. One blinks at you slowly, as if to say, "You call this architecture?" As the sun climbs, you break for a quick snack. Tamales wrapped in maize leaves, still warm from the cook fire. Inside is a mix of beans and squash flowers. It tastes like sunshine and survival. You sit under the ahu jode and listen to hum of life. Insects buzzing, reeds rustling, water slapping gently against woven stakes. You catch a glimmer across the lake, a ritual procession moving toward Tenochtitlan. Priests in embroidered capes, drummers keeping a heartbeat rhythm, and dancers with more feathers than a pillow factory. You pause, have a tamale in your mouth, and watch as the colors streak across the water like living flame. Apparently, the ceremony is to honor Tlaloc, the rain god. It makes sense. Without rain and lake, there's no Chinampa, no maize, no markets. It's a polite thank you note to the sky, written in incense and carefully choreographed footwork. The more cynical farmers say it's just for show, a way for priests to stay fed and fabulous. But deep down, everyone knows how fragile the balance is. The lake gives, but it can take two. Floods, droughts, and storms don't RSVP. And so, just in case, they dance. You watch the ripples long after the last drumbeat fades. A fringe theory whispers its way through your thoughts. Some believe the Chinampas weren't just farms. They were symbolic maps, microcosms of the universe. Earth, water, air life. Your tiny rectangle of mud might be a cosmological diagram. If you squint hard and think poetic, historians still argue if this is mythic overreach or cultural genius. You just know it grows really good tomatoes. By mid-afternoon, your hands are muddy, your back sore, but your soul feels curiously light. You've added another row to your patch, carefully constructed, lovingly muddied, and ready to feed your household for seasons to come. On your paddle home, you pass a boy fishing from a Chinampa's edge, his legs dangling lazily into the water. He grins and shows off his catch, a fat axolotl. You both laugh, knowing he'll tell a dramatically inflated version of this story later. And that's the thing, Chinampas are more than just farmland. They're home, history, grocery store, and storybook all rolled into one. You lean into the rhythm of your paddle, gliding back through the reeds as birds will overhead like blessings in flight. Your plot is waiting, shimmering softly in the waning light. The trees whisper as you step ashore, and you exhale into the stillness, ankle deep in mud, surrounded by the quiet triumph of another day spent weaving earth from water. You start the morning with a cup of pulque, thick, fermented, and just sour enough to jolt your senses. It's not coffee, but hey, it gets the blood moving. You stretch and head for the water, your canoe bobbing lazily at the Chinampa's edge like it's still deciding whether to wake up. Today, you're trading. Every few days, your community's farmers paddle out with their produce, converging at the canals near the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan. You pile in your bundles, maize wrapped in woven mats, chilies, squash, a modest cluster of social flowers, bright marigolds, fresh and stubbornly cheerful. Your neighbor insists you throw in a few bundles of episode 2. They'll trade for chocolate, she promises. That's all you needed to hear. The paddle rhythm is soothing. Splash, drag, lift. The water is a wide mirror of cloud and memory, broken only by the thin wakes of other traders making their way toward the city. It's an aquatic parade of possibility. Baskets of goods, dogs perched like captains, toddlers peeking out from beneath tarps, and ducks in very questionable cages. As you approach the market zone, the quiet, reed-filled canals give way to livelier water routes. You hear it before you see it. Laughter, bargaining, the occasional dramatic shout of seller trying to out-yell a parrot. Yes, that parrot speaks Nahuatl, and yes, it does have a better sales pitch than most adults. Scholars still argue whether this particular parrot ever held a minor public office, given its negotiation skills. Once ashore, you navigate the rows of stalls. It's a full-on sensory ambush: sweet tamarind, burning copal incense, roasting maize, and a cascade of color from produced textiles and feathers so vivid you briefly question your own wardrobe choices. You lay out your Chinampa harvest with quiet pride, brushing stray bits of reed from the bundles. A woman with a conical hat buys your chilies in exchange for cacao beans, those small, bitter treasures that double as currency. A boy trades you a clay flute for a bundle of fresh greens. His face lights up when you show him how to play it. Well, how to tempt play it. It mostly wheezes like a goose with bronchitis, but he loves it anyway. Market systems in the Aztec world are their own kind of wonder. Historians confirm that the Tlatelolco market, just next to Tenochtitlan, was one of the largest in the world at the time, with as many as 60,000 people trading on peak days. That's like combining Costco with a concert and a family reunion, all held on a floating dock. And the whole thing ran surprisingly smoothly. No cash registers, no shopping carts, and yet somehow no chaos, just a satisfying hum of society in motion. Still, historians debate how prices were enforced and whether some merchants gamed the system. There's talk of a few early forms of regulation, maybe even market inspectors called Pocatlatloc, making sure no one passed off a spoiled fish as fresh. You eye a fishmonger now who's aggressively fanning his merchandise with a turkey feather. Suspicious. You spot a corner with artisan snacks, candied amaranth bars, honey cakes, even a sweet treat made from toasted insects and syrup. You raise an eyebrow. The vendor shrugs. High in protein, she says. You buy two, for science. As the sun hits its peak, you sit with other Chinampa growers beneath a woven reed awning, sipping cacao drink spiced with chili. It's thick, frothy, and somewhere between hot chocolate and a dare. You chat, trading stories, weather predictions, and crop woes. One man insists his Chinampa is haunted. Another claims his ducks are unionizing. It's in these small, absurd conversations that the soul of your work really lives. Not just in planting and harvesting, but in connecting, laughing, and making the whole floating world feel a little more human. As you pack up your remaining wares, you overhear an elderly woman explaining to a cluster of young listeners how Chinampas are part of a divine contract. The earth gods gave us mud, she says. We shape it and feed it, and in return it feeds us. You nod. It sounds a little poetic, sure, but standing on floating farmland every day tends to make you believe in a little magic. Back in your canoe, your trade pack is lighter, but your thoughts are full. You nibble on one of those candied insect bars. It's crunchy, sweet, surprisingly okay. You paddle home slowly, letting the afternoon breeze push you just a bit. You pass other Chinamperos, also drifting back from a market. One waves a fresh machete like a trophy. Another shows off a new tattoo of a maize stalk spiraling around his forearm. It's equal parts farming pride and midlife crisis. You catch a glimpse of the sun behind the volcanoes, Izta and Popo, standing tall and quiet like stone parents watching over the valley. The lake glitters beneath them, ancient and impossibly alive. Back at your plot, you unload the cacao beans with a smile. Your neighbor inspects them approvingly, then hands you a cup of zacalado, bitter, spiced, and sacred. You sip it slowly, the flavor unfolding like memory. Not bad for a morning that started with duck hecklers and a parrot trying to sell you salt. You step back into the earth, your toes sinking into the familiar softness of the Chinampa. You can already hear tomorrow's work whispering from the reeds. New furrows to dig, seedlings to nurture, and stories to carry. You stretch your back and let out a satisfied sigh. The lake laps gently, and somewhere nearby, a flute wheezes that goosey little tune. You wake early again, because no one who farms floating garden gets to sleep in, ever. And this time, the air smells different. Damp, electric, like the god are dragging wet cloaks across the mountains. A storm is brewing. You step outside and look across the lake. The water is still, but the clouds stack like gray pyramids above Popocatépetl's snow-dusted crown. You mutter something half holy, half sarcastic under your breath. Oh, great. Rain again. Well, there's a game of patience and paranoia here. On one hand, rain means life. On the other, it means landslides, soggy crops, and canoes that somehow always seem to spring leaks on wet days. You kneel beside your Chinampa's edge and check the reeds. The ropes holding the structure together seem tight, but the water level is higher than yesterday. Not panic-inducing yet, but close enough to keep you edgy. You pull out your digging stick and start the day's work. Every few weeks, you dredge the canals, scooping rich, dark sludge from the bottom and layering it back on the garden. It's messy, slow work. Mud squelches under your fingernails and clings to your arms like a clingy toddler. But it's sacred. This black gold is what keeps your crops full of fire. No fertilizer trucks here. Just you, your mud, and the slightly judgmental stare of an egret who's watching like it once owned this land and still isn't over losing it. Aztec farmers called this cycle of dredging and layering tlacanali, which roughly translates to burning water. It's also a metaphor for war, for destruction and rebirth, a poetic way to describe what you're doing as you slop more muck onto your squash beds. You're waging war on nutrient depletion. Basically, sexy stuff. Historians still argue whether Chinampa farmers worked alone or cooperatively. Some claim entire families managed massive clusters together, with roles divided by age and skill. Others believe certain Chinampas were rented or redistributed by central authorities in Tenochtitlan, turning you into a kind of soggy sharecropper. Either way, there's no union, no HR department, and no vacation days. Just you, the lake, and your callous hands. Rain finally breaks around mid-morning. Not a gentle drizzle either, a full symphonic downpour. You scramble to cover your seedlings with woven mats, cursing under your breath as the water soaks through your tunic and drips off your nose. Every farmer nearby is doing the same, yelling advice across the canals like it'll help stop the sky. Eventually, the storm passes, leaving behind that rich, wet smell of stirred-up earth. Your Chinampa has held up, barely. One edge has begun to slough into the water, and you brace it with new reed bundles, tying them tight with maguey fiber. The work leaves you drenched, muddy, and weirdly proud, like you fought a monster and won, even if the monster was just really ambitious weather. A break in the clouds lets sunlight trickle through, and you take a seat on a raised edge, watching steam rise from the soil like it's sighing in relief. You pick at a tamal wrapped in maize leaf from your lunch pouch, warm, starchy, with a bit of chilly heat. Not gourmet, but comforting in that my ancestors probably ate this too, kind of way. You reflect, as one does when your muscles are too tired to do anything else. You think about how these floating gardens have fed your people for generations, how they've outlived kings, droughts, even Spanish gossip. The Chinampas have no throne, no crown, no armies, but they're survivors. Some scholars claim that these gardens were so efficient they produce 7 times the yield of conventional farming. Others question this, arguing that those numbers might be overhyped or based on selective reports from colonial scribes trying to either glorify or condemn Aztec society, depending on their mood and political agenda. You just know your back hurts and your corn is growing. You stand again, walking the narrow path between your maize and your beans, planted together in the old triad, maize for structure, beans for nitrogen, squash for shade. It's genius, honestly, and no one writes enough love poems to companion planting. You crouch to remove a few weeds, your hands moving automatically like they've done this for centuries. The sun inches lower and the air cools. Frogs begin their evening chorus, a kind of squeaky lullaby. You hear the slow creak of another canoe arriving. It's your cousin bringing tools and gossip, mostly in that order. She helps you reinforce the Chinampa edges with willow branches and tells you about a dog that stole a priest's sandals. You laugh. That dog deserves a statue. As twilight sets in, you light a small fire in a clay brazier at the center of the Chinampa. The smoke spirals upward, mixing with the purple of the evening sky. You warm your hands and watch the flames. The heat feels earned. You think about the gods again, especially Tlaloc, Lord of Rain, whose googly-eyed stone faces still stare out from old temples. He's capricious, sure, but today he gave you mud, gave your beans a drink, and only slightly tried to ruin your day. Maybe he's in a good mood. From somewhere across the water, a flute plays again. Probably that same goosey tune from the kid at the market. It's oddly soothing this time, like the lake itself is laughing with you. You settle down on your mat, wrapped in a woven cloak, still damp at the edges, but warm enough. Tomorrow will bring more mud, more work, more weeds. But tonight, you've done enough. You close your eyes, drifting off the sound of frogs, flute, and the soft whisper of water against your floating farm. Morning sneaks in again, this time with a breeze that tickles your cheeks and the unmistakable smell of damp earth turning sweet under the warming sun. You stretch with the kind of creak you'd expect from an old canoe, not a person in their prime. But here you are, already debating whether today's harvest will outpace the weeds that definitely plotted against you overnight. As you glide your canoe across the canal toward the next Chinampa, your uncle's, which he insists is better because he sings to his tomatoes, you pass by rows and rows of floating gardens that form a living grid, like a giant green checkerboard laid gently over water. It's all astonishingly organized. Your people have turned a soggy, temperamental lake into the breadbasket of an empire, or more accurately, the tamal basket. It's easy to forget, when you're elbow deep in mud, that the entire system is a masterpiece of pre-industrial engineering. The canals don't just separate plots. They manage water flow, temperature regulation, and even transportation. You can roll from one garden to the next, basket of chilies balanced at your feet, and never touch solid land. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were a sudden innovation or a gradual response to population pressure. Some say they date back centuries before the Aztecs, possibly pioneered by earlier peoples like the Zacamilca. Others argue the system as we know it exploded in scale only after Tenochtitlan began its meteoric rise, pushed forward by imperial demand and a touch of existential food anxiety. Because let's face it, empire is hungry. Today, you're helping build a new Chinampa. Not from scratch. That's a whole ritual in itself. But expanding an existing one. Your uncle insists it's for better being alignment, but you're pretty sure it's because he saw his neighbor's pumpkins and got competitive. It's fine. Farming, after all, is 30% growing food and 70% impressing other farmers. You start by cutting fresh bundles of junco reeds, weaving them into tight mats. These go into the foundation, layered on top of each other like lasagna. If lasagna were spiky and full of mosquito eggs, then come the poles. Willow saplings, sharpened at one end, are hammered into the lake bed with careful rhythm. They're spaced evenly, outlining the rectangle to be like the border of a sleepy green postage stamp. The real magic happens when you shovel in mud dredge from the canal floor. It's heavier than you remember. It splats like pudding and smells faintly of fish and yesterday's rain. But you know, deep down it's loaded with nutrients. You're not just piling mud, you're layering a future. Once the foundation is high enough to sit slightly above water level, you plant the edge with more willows. These saplings will root quickly, their tangly roots binding the whole structure like nature's duct tape. Your uncle talks to the trees as he works, asks them politely to grow fast, to hold the soil well, and to be more attractive than his neighbor's pitiful hedge. You smile not because it's silly, but because it works. Maybe not in a scientifically measurable way, but in a spiritual one. And maybe that's just as important. A few other farmers paddle over to help, or, more accurately, to comment loudly while occasionally lifting a stick. There's laughter, teasing, and one very bad pun about maize that makes you regret having ears. Still, it's good company. You learn about a child who caught a fish using only her sleeve, and a chicken that refuses to crow unless someone sings to it first. Chinampa life comes with excellent gossip. A bowl of atoll is passed around, warm and thick with ground maize, flavored with a hint of cinnamon. You sip it slowly, the heat spreading through your limbs. It's not just a snack. It's fuel, tradition, comfort in a bowl. By mid-afternoon, the Chinampa expansion is done. Your uncle dramatically christens it with a sprig of episode and a solemn, welcome new mud baby, which sends one of the kids into giggles so intense he nearly falls into the canal. You agree to plant beans on it tomorrow. For now, it needs to settle to breathe. You roll back toward your own garden, the setting sun painting the water with long streaks of gold. It's quiet again, that deep, hushed stillness that only comes when everyone else is too tired to talk and the lake decides to hold its breath. You pass a heron standing on a Chinampa edge, tall and motionless, except the flick of an eye as you drift by. It's probably judgy your rowing form. Everything in nature seems a little judgy if you stare at it long enough. Back at your garden, you kneel and run your fingers through the soil. It's firm, warm from the sun, and smells exactly right. Your maize plants sway in the breeze like they're stretching. One squash vine has escaped the bed entirely and is staging a slow-motion escape down the canal bank. You leave it, let it dream. As night falls, you sit beneath a tree planted at the Chinampa's corner. Every garden has one. They provide shade, root stability, and something to lean against after a long day. This one is a caplin. Its branches dotted with tiny fruits that are tart enough to make your eyes water, but weirdly addictive. You nibble a few, watching the first stars blink into view. You think about the people who've done this before you. Your parents, their parents, and the endless lines stretching back like footprints through the mud. They all bent their backs here. They all trusted the lake, even when it flooded or dried or whispered secrets in the night. There's no crown for this. No temple murals of bent farmers knee-deep in sludge. But you know, deep in your calluses, that this is how civilizations survive. Not with gold, not with war drums, but with mud and roots and the stubborn act of growing food on water. And just maybe, with a little help from the heron. Morning mist clings the canal like a lazy cat, curling around the prow of your canoe as you paddle with slow, practiced strokes. The water is glassy, reflecting the green Chinampa edges in perfect symmetry, as if the world has been flipped upside down. Somewhere in the fog, a frog makes a half-hearted croak, like even it isn't ready for today. You're on your way to barter. Today's haul: bunches of episode, a few clay-colored squash, and 3 baskets of amaranth leaves that you swear doubled in size overnight. They're so fresh they're practically flexing. The journey to the Tyne Quisley market is never dull. Floating through canals, you pass Chinampas planted with everything from marigolds to maize. Their rows so neat they'd make a geometry teacher cry tears of joy. Some beds are half-harvested, with furrowed soil and little garden tools resting like napping mice. Others are untouched, thick with greens, their edges swaying the water's gentle pulse. You spot a woman ahead of you in a wider boat, carefully balancing a stack of reed baskets taller than her. It's unclear whether she's steering or just hoping the boat negotiates with gravity. She throws you a grin. You nod, the universal code for, if this thing tips, I'm pretending not to know you. At the heart of Tenochtitlan, the market sprawls like a woven rug come to life. Historians still argue whether it could rival the markets of medieval Europe in size and complexity, but one thing's certain: it's far more delicious. You dock your canoe and climb out, stretching your back and trying not to drop the amaranth. The air is thick with the scent of roasting maize, dried chilies, and a type of fried dough that somehow smells like both sugar and ambition. There are sounds, too. Merchants calling out prices, bartering over the day's catch. Someone shouting that their cacao is guaranteed not cursed this time. You wander the rows. There are piles of tomatillos wrapped in their papery husks, strings of garlic braids, gourd hollowed and painted with spirals. One man is selling roasted grasshoppers dusted with lime and salt. You buy a handful for the walk home. They crunch like satisfaction. Your squash earns you admiration. Apparently, its color is particularly appealing today, and you trade it for fresh tortillas and some new seeds your neighbor insists came from a plot near Texcoco. He winks when he hands them over, which could mean they're magical or he's just had too much pulque before lunch. Bartering is less about strict value and more about performance. You throw in a compliment about someone's weaving, pretend to hesitate, offer your best skeptical frown, and eventually everyone walks away believing they've won. It's a game, one you've learned to play with style. As you snack on the grasshoppers, still crunchy, still good, you spot something unexpected. A vendor selling tiny floating reed boats, complete with miniature Chinampas on top. Some even have little clay figurines planting crops. You pick one up, amused. The detail is absurd. The vendor says they're for altars, to honor the gods of agriculture and lake spirits, or to keep kids occupied while you weed. whichever you prefer. You buy one. It makes you weirdly emotional. Back at your canoe, you load your spoils. A new kind of chili, some slightly overripe guavas, and a thick slab of amaranth seed cake called alegria, which means joy. It's sticky and sweet, made with honey and puffed grains, and it tastes like you imagine a good nap, what if it were edible. Paddling back, your arms ache in that satisfying way that means you've earned your dinner. You pass under a woven reed bridge where a group of kids is dangling their feet, giggling and tossing pebbles at fish. One hits the side of your canoe, and they freeze. You raise an eyebrow, and they dissolve into laughter. You're not even mad. It was a good throw. You stop by your neighbor's chinampa to share a few tortillas. Her garden is shaded by a massive ayujo tree, its branches brushing the sky like a sleepy giant's hair. She shows you her latest planting trick, layering dried chili skins into the compost to ward off ants. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs practiced early organic pest control or if they just really hated ants, but you file the tip away. As twilight creeps over the water, you finally return to your own garden. The willows cast long shadows across the rows. You walk along the edge, checking for signs of pests or overwatering. A family of ducks has moved in again. You consider charging rent. One of them quacks dismissively. You plant the new chili seeds, whispering a few encouraging words. It's not superstition, it's tradition. You press your palms into the warm earth, grounding yourself. The miniature reed boat sits beside your maize stalks now, its tiny farmer forever frozen in a planting pose. Maybe the gods are watching. Maybe they just like good craftsmanship. Dinner is quiet. Tortillas, a bit of roasted squash, some atoll to wash it down. You sit with your legs dangling over the canal's edge. The night sounds folding around you like a blanket. A single heron glides overhead, silent and precise, the undisputed king of bird elegance. You think about the market, its noise, its smells, the chaos of trade and laughter, and chilly deals gone wrong. You think about how this whole floating world is supported by people like you, rowing silently across dawn-still water, coaxing life from mud and sunlight. There's a quiet pride in that. You close your eyes for a moment, and the reed boat's little figure seems to nod in approval. The next day rises slow and heavy, like syrup poured from a cold clay jar. The clouds hang low over Lake Texcoco, muting the sky into a soft, silver blur, and your breath leaves tiny ghosts in the morning air. You slide your paddle into the canal without a sound. It's compost day. You drift toward the spot where the shallows are thickest, an old patch where the lake floor feels more like pudding than water. This is where you'll gather your secret weapon, lake muck. Rich, dark, nutrient-dense sludge that turns even the grumpiest maize plant into a show-off. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs understood the exact chemical properties of the muck, or they just had really good instincts and noses. You reach in with a basket, scooping deep. The muck oozes like ancient chocolate, laced with decomposing plants, fish remains, and something suspiciously like an old sandal. You wrinkle your nose and keep going. Nobody said glory smelled good. The Aztecs called this mixture tzoali, and while it wasn't technically magical, it might as well have been. It fed the floating gardens, enriched the soil, and probably kept several priesthoods from starving during droughts. The fact that it squelched like a bad decision when you stepped in it was just a bonus. Back on your chinampa, you tip the muck into waiting troughs between the garden beds. It seeps into the woven mats and reeds, blending with last week's compost of crushed maize husks and fish bones. The whole chinampa gives a satisfied sigh. Okay, it's probably just a wind, but you pretend it's gratitude. Then it's on to the next layer of this underground feast. Decayed aquatic plants. You gather armfuls of them, still damp and cool, and toss them across the topsoil like bizarre salad toppings. A neighbor once told you to bury a frog in each corner for luck. You didn't ask questions. It's a delicate balance. Too much muck and the roots suffocate. Not enough, and the crops pout like overdramatic nobles. You crouch down, feeling the earth. It's spongy, like the back of a very agreeable llama. Perfect. As you work, you hum an old melody. You're not even sure where you picked it up. Maybe from a vendor, maybe from your grandmother, maybe it floated across the lake one day, and decided to stay. It's slow and repetitive, the kind of tune that hypnotizes your hands into motion. Lunch is a simple affair. A tamale steamed with squash blossoms and epazote, still warm from the fire. You eat sitting on the chinampa edge, legs dangling, toes brushing water. A dragonfly lands on your arm and stays longer than necessary. You suspect it's judging your compost technique. After lunch, it's time for repairs. One of your retaining walls is sagging, probably gnawed by the same cheerful ducks who keep squatting on your tomatoes. You gather bundles of fresh ahijote branches and drive them into the edge, weaving in reeds and mud until the wall stands firm again. The ahijote tree, part willow, part miracle, grows like it has something to prove. Its roots stabilize the chinampa borders. Its branches provide shade, and its leaves can be boiled into a tea that may or may not cure heartbreak. Fringe historians love to claim that Aztec engineers bred them specifically for chinampa use. Mainstream scholars usually just raise one eyebrow and mutter something about natural selection. You toss a few spare branches into the water. They'll take root eventually. Everything does here. As the sun starts its lazy descent behind the western mountains, a heron struts along your canal like it owns the place. It's got that aristocratic walk. Head high, legs too long, judging everything it sees. You bow slightly in greeting. It ignores you as usual. You pause to admire your work. The muck has already started to sink in, darkening the soil to a rich coffee color. The amaranth leaves look perkier, and even the beans have stopped drooping like overworked interns. You allow yourself a smug little grin. Then a splash. The ducks are back. One of them is dragging a half-eaten tortilla, and the expression of a creature who regrets nothing. You sigh. They stare. A standoff. You decide to let them stay, for now, but you're considering a toll system. Maybe one shiny pebble per day of loitering. Before night falls, you add one final layer to the compost. A thin scattering of crushed obsidian chips. Not for nutrients, no. This is superstition territory. Some gardeners believe obsidian wards off bad harvests. Others say it just looks cool. You do it because your great-uncle once swore it saved his entire maize crop from turning into inedible fluff. Historians, naturally, still argue whether any of this actually affected yields. But who cares? The plants like sparkle. Back at your hut, you wash the muck from your hands in a clay basin, the water instantly turning gray and swirling like storm clouds. You scrub your nails with a dried corn husk, then wrap your hands in a woven towel that smells faintly of cedar and smoke. Dinner is late and deserved. Simmered beans with chili, a wedge of sweet maguey cake, and a clay cup of pulque that's more froth than liquid. You sip slowly, letting the day's work soften behind your eyes. Your body aches, but in that way that promises good dreams. The kind where your corn grows tall enough to shade your whole chinampa, and ducks politely ask before moving in. Outside, the stars begin to blink awake, shy and scattered, like they're peeking to see who's still up. The lake whispers, reeds rustle, and the ahijote trees sway like sleepy dancers. You lean back against the cool wall of your home, watching the night settle into place. There's comfort in the rhythm of it all. The muck, the plants, the ducks, even the mud on your ankles. Tomorrow, you'll check the seedlings, test the water levels. Maybe even start building a new chinampa if the mood strikes. For now, though, you're exactly where you need to be. And somewhere out there, the reed boat with its tiny farmer bobs quietly in the dark. Still planting, still tending. The morning air is a bit sharper today, crisp like the first bite of a freshly picked guava. You step out onto your chinampa, and the water's surface glints with early light, tiny ripples skimming like whispered secrets. It's harvest season, but not just any harvest. Today you're gathering the first amaranth seeds of the year, those tiny, glittering nuggets that have been the backbone of Aztec sustenance and ceremony for centuries. You kneel by the edge, your fingers brushing over the seed, heads heavy and bursting with promise. The amaranth plant isn't just food. It's woven into stories, prayers, and traditions. There's an old tale about how the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl taught humans to grow it, turning grain into gold in a way that still has historians debating whether it's myth or metaphor. The fact that amaranth can grow almost anywhere, even on chinampas floating in swampy lakes, only adds to its mystique. As you carefully harvest the seeds, you notice the tiny black ants marching in formation. Nature's own little farmers, harvesting their own crops underground. You smile at the thought. Farming is an ancient dance, shared by many creatures. Meanwhile, some scholars suggest that Aztec gardeners might have intentionally encouraged ant colonies to keep pests in check, a clever eco-hack lost to most modern agriculture. With your basket full, you move toward the next crop, bright red chili peppers hanging like miniature lanterns. The smell is sharp and piquant, tickling your nostrils as you pluck them carefully. These chiles aren't just spice, they're history, and some say the Aztecs believed they carried the heat of the sun itself. You remember a fringe theory that posits the chili's fiery bite was seen as a form of spiritual purification, a way to clear the body and soul before rituals. Historians remain divided on whether this was widespread belief or localized folklore. Between rows of squash and beans, you spot a hummingbird hovering, its wings a blur of iridescent green. It darts to a flower and back again, a reminder that your Chinampa is part of a larger ecosystem, a vibrant, buzzing community, not just a floating garden. The hummingbird has long been a symbol of energy and resurrection in Aztec culture, and some say it represents the spirit of warriors. As you gather more produce, a small family of ducks waddles by, their feathers still damp from a morning swim. One of them shakes its head and flings a spray of water droplets onto your cheek. You laugh softly, wiping the water away. Ducks here aren't just pests. They're partners in this ecosystem, eating bugs and fertilizing your crops in their own messy way. Yet, there's a curious dispute among historians about whether ducks were deliberately encouraged by farmers or simply freeloaders who got lucky. After hours of work, your hands are sticky with sap and earth, and your back aches pleasantly. You take a break under the shade of an ahijote tree, its leaves whispering softly above. You pull out a small clay cup filled with pulque, the fermented maguey drink that's both a staple and a treat. It's sweet and slightly sour, a taste that carries centuries in every sip. Drinking it feels like touching the pulse of your ancestors' daily lives. Looking out over the patchwork of Chinampas, you feel a surge of pride. These floating farms aren't just agriculture, they're resilience. They embody human ingenuity in the face of challenging environments, a testament to adaptation and care. Historians still argue how much credit should go to Aztec engineering versus natural landscape advantages, but you know it's a bit of both. As the sun climbs higher, the light dances across the lake, shimmering on the reed mats and painted water lilies. You gather your tools, ready to ferry your harvest back to shore. The work is demanding but rhythmical, like a meditation, and you feel a deep connection to this ancient craft. The ducks follow, quacking their approval or possibly plotting to steal some of your hard-earned food. You shake your head with a grin. Tomorrow, you will plant more, tend more, and maybe dream a little of the future while rooted firmly in the past. The afternoon sun settles into a golden haze as you push your small canoe away from the shore, Chinampa patch growing smaller behind you. You float quietly over the calm waters, the gentle lap against the canoe's hull almost hypnotic. It's the kind of moment that invites reflection, like you're drifting not only on the lake, but also through layers of history that ripple beneath the surface. You think about the social life that revolves around these floating gardens. Chinampa farming isn't a solo gig. It's a communal symphony. Families share duties, exchanging labor, seeds, and stories. Every Chinampa is a microcosm of Aztec society, where cooperation and knowledge transfer keep the system alive. Oddly enough, some scholars argue that this cooperative model was an early form of sustainable community agriculture, way ahead of its time, while others suggest it was more about social control within the empire. You guess it's probably a bit of both. Like most things, a sudden splash pulls you from your thoughts. You glance over to see children playing along the water's edge, laughing and chasing fish with bare feet. Their joy is contagious, and you can almost hear their chatter blending with the calls of distant birds and the rustle of reeds. You realize that Chinampas were more than food sources. They were playgrounds, classrooms, and sacred spaces all rolled into one. You remember reading about the religious significance of these waters. The lake, named Texcoco, was seen as a sacred place, a liminal world between earth and the underworld. Aztec priests performed ceremonies here, calling upon deities like Tlaloc, god of rain and water, to bless the crops and the people. Interestingly, there's a quirky theory that some Chinampa farmers themselves took on priestly roles, blending agriculture with spirituality in ways historians are still debating. As you glide past a cluster of colorful flowers blooming atop one Chinampa, your eyes catch the glimmer of an obsidian blade resting against a wooden post. Obsidian, volcanic glass, so sharp it could slice through flesh like butter, was prized by the Aztecs for tools and weapons alike. But here, it's a humble farmer's tool, proof that even the sharpest blades were essential for everyday survival, not just epic battles. You smile, thinking how easy it is to forget that life's practical edges are as important as its grand stories. Up ahead, an elderly woman tends her patch of maize, humming a tune you swear you've heard in market squares and temple festivals. The sweet smell of roasted corn floats toward you, blending with the lake's fresh scent. You realize the food, music, and rituals are so intertwined that separating them feels impossible. Food isn't just nourishment. It's culture, identity, and memory all folded into one. Just then, a breeze picks up, carrying the faint but unmistakable scent of cacao. Your mind wanders to the luxurious chocolate drinks once reserved for nobility and warriors, a far cry from the humble Chinampa farmers, but part of the same rich tapestry. Some historians debate whether cacao was actually grown on Chinampas or imported, but either way, its significance is undeniable, an ancient delicacy that tied the empire's social fabric together. Your canoe drifts gently toward the main island where the city of Tenochtitlan thrives, its temples, palaces, and bustling markets towering above the lake. It's a stark contrast to the serene calm of the Chinampas, yet both worlds depend on each other. Without the floating gardens, the city would starve. Without the city, the gardens might wither. The sky deepens into shades of pink and lavender as you dock your canoe and unload the day's harvest. The scent of cooked maize and roasted peppers mingles with the evening air. You feel a profound sense of connection, not just to the Aztec past, but to the ongoing pulse of human ingenuity and resilience. As night falls, you think about how these ancient gardens have inspired modern eco-farming techniques worldwide. Floating farms, sustainable agriculture, community cooperation. These aren't just old stories. They're blueprints for our future. You head home, tired but content, the gentle croak of frogs and distant drum beats weaving you into a peaceful sleep. You wake up slowly to the soft murmur of water and birdsong, a world where nature and human hands have been dancing together for centuries. As you stand at the edge of the Chinampa, the cool morning air fills your lungs. The scent of damp earth and blossoming flowers is rich and grounding, and your feet sink slightly into the moist soil, reminding you of how these islands float delicately on a lake that seems endless. The Aztec ingenuity behind Chinampa farming becomes clearer the more you observe. Each tiny island is carefully crafted with layers of mud, lake sediment, and decaying vegetation, anchored by willow trees whose roots weave like natural ropes into the lake bed. This method creates fertile, self-watering plots that never seem to run dry, making food production incredibly efficient. You might call it ancient hydroponics, except it's all natural, all organic, and perfected through generations of trial and error. You marvel at the plants thriving around you, maize stalks swaying gently, beans climbing sturdily up poles, bright chilies hanging like tiny lanterns, and fragrant herbs flourishing in every nook. It's a sensory overload of greens, reds, and yellows, punctuated by the occasional splash as a fish jumps near the water's edge. You can almost taste the freshness, the complexity of flavors that make Aztec cuisine so unique. Here's a curious fact you hadn't expected. Chinampas were reportedly so productive that a single acre could feed up to 7 people, a feat that even modern farming sometimes struggles to match. The Aztecs managed this with crop rotation, intercropping, and a deep understanding of seasonal cycles. Historians still argue whether Chinampa technology spread widely beyond the Valley of Mexico or remained a localized marvel. Either way, it's impressive enough to make you rethink what ancient agriculture could achieve. Suddenly, a bright splash catches your eye. A colorful bird, maybe a kingfisher or a hummingbird, darts from flower to flower. Birds were vital here. not just for pollination, but also because their droppings enrich the soil naturally, a quirky early form of fertilization. You smile at how nature's little helpers were partners in this floating farming enterprise. Walking toward a small hut built on stilts, you spot a basket brimming with bright orange marigold flowers. The Aztecs believed marigolds connected the living world to the underworld, using them during rituals to honor ancestors. You realize the boundaries between farming, spirituality, and community were blurrier here than you ever imagined. Food was life, yes, but was also prayer, celebration, and identity. Nearby, a group of women sorts freshly harvested amaranth seeds, their delicate, nutty flavor prized for its nutritional value. Amaranth was a sacred grain, so important that it was sometimes forbidden to be sold, reserved for temples and royalty. You chuckle at the idea of ancient superfoods being a status symbol centuries before wellness blogs made quinoa cool. The conversation shifts to the great marketplaces of Tenochtitlan, where Chinampa farmers brought their produce. These bustling hubs weren't just about trade. They were social centers buzzing with gossip, music, and politics. You learn that some historians still debate how much of the Chinampa food made it to market versus being consumed within local neighborhoods. You guess the answer is as mixed as the flavors of the dishes served. As the sun climbs higher, you pause to watch a fisherman skillfully casting his net near the Chinampa's edge. Fish from the lake, tilapia, catfish, and even tiny shrimp complemented the diet, making the Aztec meals diverse and balanced. It's a reminder that Chinampas were just one part of a complex food web, blending land, water, and culture seamlessly. A sudden breeze rustles the reeds, carrying the faint sound of flute and distant chanting from the city's temple district. You think about the many layers of life here, spiritual, practical, social, all entwined like the roots of those willow trees holding the Chinampa steady. This floating world wasn't just a clever farming technique. It was a way of life, a testament to human creativity in harmony with nature. As the day warms, you find a quiet spot beneath the willow's drooping branches and let your mind drift with the water's gentle sway, lulled by the steady pulse of an ancient rhythm that still beats in the heart of the lake.